Hey everyone, Hernan Colmenero here, and I am at the Monterrey Park farm with
Stephanie Patillo here.
And today, Stephanie, what are you going to be teaching us?
We're going to be talking about propagating with seeds.
Nice. All right, well, stay tuned. Let's get started.
So today, guys, we are going to be talking about seeds. Mostly we're going to be talking about propagating seeds. Now, what are seeds? Well, seeds come from adult plants when they're done flowering. And we take the seeds from the fruit that they've grown. And seeds can be grown in the ground or in containers. And if we give them food, water, and sunlight, they'll grow new plants so that we can eat more food. And this is what seed propagation is. Now, seeds come in all different shapes and sizes and colors. And here I have a variety of seeds to show you just how different they are. Here we have some cucumber seeds, some squash seeds, and some very tiny carrot seeds, as well as watermelon, broccoli, and beets. Now, all of these seeds can be planted in different ways. Some seeds can go straight into the ground and be direct seeded. And those seeds are such seeds as squash and watermelon and carrots can go direct seeded. Other seeds do need to be started for transplant. And when we do that, we're starting them in soil, like these soil blocks, and we're letting them grow up in the protection of a greenhouse or inside so that they can get big enough to go and be planted elsewhere. One thing you can do to get seeds is you can take seeds from food that you have at home, or you can buy them at the store where they sell them in packages. Some seeds are better to be bought because they're harder to get, like vegetable seeds. Because broccoli seeds, when we eat broccoli, we're eating the flower before it blooms. So we're not able to get the seeds from the plant if we eat it. And so a lot of times you will get them at the store instead. Now, when you want to gather seeds, you can cut open your fruit, and inside you'll find the seeds. So this is a squash, and inside this fibrous material, we're going to find the seeds inside. And so these seeds are really small still, but they're in there. And when you collect seeds from fruit at home, make sure that you wash them and get all the fibrous stuff so that all you have left are the seeds by themselves. And you can let them dry out before you plant them. Seeds hold everything inside to start a whole new plant. So if we put these in the ground or in soil and give them what they need, we'll be able to eat from them again. So here we have a variety of seeds, some that can be planted directly into the ground or some that need to be started in soil in a container to be planted later. Here we have some carrot seeds. You can see how very fine and tiny they are. These have to be put in the ground directly. So they need to be direct seeded because their roots are very fragile and can't be disrupted if they were to be transplanted. Here we have cucumber seeds. These are where we get our pickles. So cucumber seeds can be direct seeded into the ground, or they can be started in soil and containers for transplant later. Here we also have squash seeds. These are some of our largest seed varieties, and these can be directly seeded in the ground, or they can be started for transplant. Over here we have our funky little beet seed. If you look closely at it, it has very sharp edges and a lot of sides, and it almost looks like a sticker or a burr that you would see. And so beet seeds also need to be direct seeded because they're a root crop and the roots can't be disturbed during transplant. Here we have our famous watermelon seeds. Hopefully everybody's experienced spitting these out during the summertime. These seeds can also be direct planted into the ground or started for transplant. Our last seed, and also really tiny like the carrot seed, is our broccoli seed. And broccoli is a type of vegetable that we eat, and it's actually the flower that we eat before it blooms. These are very tiny seeds, and these can be put in containers with soil for transplant later so that the young plants are protected before going into their permanent home. Here we're going to take a look at direct seeding some squash seeds right into the ground of our garden bed here. Now these are already growing right here next to us. We have these nice big beautiful squash plants that we're getting zucchini off of. But as you can see, we've got a little bald spot right here. So the plant that was here, it didn't make it. And now we're going to direct seed some more zucchini seeds in hopes that we get some plants that grow up and fill in this space and continue to give us zucchini. So when you're direct seeding in the ground or even in a container where you're going to grow the plant, you want to make sure that you have a nice clean area free of weeds. So I've removed all the weeds from this area, and I've even added some really nice compost, so that will help keep moisture in and help keep those plants healthy and happy. When you start to dig your hole, you want to make sure that you loosen up the soil so that it's nice and fluffy. So I'm mixing in this compost with my existing soil so that I get a nice fluffy looking material. Alright, so this is what we're going to be able to plant our seeds in. Now, the rule of thumb when you plant your seeds is you want to plant them at least 2 to 3 times their width. So, however wide the seeds are, you want to plant them 2 to 3 times that size. So these zucchini seeds are pretty big. They're some of the biggest seeds that we plant, and so that means that 2 to 3 times its size is going to be 1, 2. So we're going to plant it a few inches into the ground. Now when we're doing the zucchini, we're actually going to put in a few seeds because we want a couple of them to grow, and then whatever is the healthiest, we're going to thin away or pull the other seedlings that have sprouted. We're going to pull those out and just leave one plant to grow so that it doesn't become overcrowded. Now once you have your seeds in the ground, you're going to gently cover them back up with your soil that you have. And it's better to plant too shallow than to plant too deep. If you plant a seed too deep, it might not be able to germinate and reach the surface, and it'll end up rotting in the ground, and you won't be able to get a plant from it. And here we have our drip irrigation. So this actually drips from little holes in here, and it gives us a nice moist soil, because when you direct seed, you need to make sure that all of your seeds stay wet for the first several days. Once you start to see a seedling pop up, then you can lower your watering, but still keep signs or look for signs of stress like wilting or no growth. It may need more water or fertilizer, plant food. You can also mark your place where you planted the seeds so that you can remember you planted them there. So if you don't have garden beds to plant in or direct seed into the ground, you can use containers like pots or plastic containers at home to grow different plants even if you don't have a garden bed. Just make sure that they have drainage with rocks or holes, and that you make sure to keep them good and watered.
You talked about transplanting too. When do we transplant versus direct seed?
So when we are transplanting a baby plant, we're doing so because we want to protect that plant as it's growing up before we go and put it out into the harsh environment. of the world, where there's bugs and wind and sun. And so the very delicate plants that we want to protect, we're starting those for transplant. We're keeping them inside of our nursery, and then when they get big enough, we're gonna take them out into the garden, and we're gonna plant them or transplant them into the garden bed. You can also transplant them into a bigger container and let them grow even bigger, and either keep them in that container, or you can even transplant that larger container into the ground. So here on the farm we have a nursery that we grow and protect our plants in. And so in this nursery, we have some tables that we put our starts or our transplants on so that they can be watered and protected from the elements before they're ready to be transplanted. And the reason that we have this is so that we can start seeds at different times or in succession, following one another, so that when we grow the crops, we're not getting all the food all at one time. We're actually harvesting over a longer period of time because we've started seeds after one another instead of all at the same time.
All right, Stephanie, so what are we doing here? What's going on?
So here we're actually going to take a look at starting seeds for transplant. And before you can start doing that, we are going to look at the ingredients that we use here at the farm to make our soil mix. At home, you can use soil from your yard as long as it's free of weeds and debris, or you can buy potting soil from the garden store that you can then use at home as well. So here we have several different ingredients, and all of these come from the earth. So we have our compost right here, which looks very much like soil or dirt, but this is just compost. Here we have what we call garden lime, and the garden lime and the green sand and the blood meal, all of these ingredients are basically plant food. So we're adding them into our soil mix because they are going to give the seedling that we're starting to transplant the food and the power it needs to sprout up and grow for us. The other mixture that we have is our peat moss, and it also looks very much like soil or mulch that you might see outside. And then the finished product right here is actually a little wet because we make soil blocks with our soil mix, but this is what it all looks together, or it all looks once you've mixed it together. So it's a nice mix of the compost, the garden lime, the peat moss, the green sand, and the blood meal. Now most of this is compost and peat moss, and then, oh, I almost forgot our perlite, which is hard to see even on a white paper plate, but it looks like confetti almost.
White confetti.
Yeah, it almost actually even looks like styrofoam,
It
you
does.
know, like little pieces of styrofoam, but it is not styrofoam. But this is used in the soil mix. You can kind of still see it in there, but this is used to keep the soil fluffy and airy. So it keeps it from compacting and getting too hard for the roots to grow and spread out. But the majority of this mix is a mixture of the peat moss and the compost and the perlite, and then there's just a dash of these three right here for nutrients.
So after mixing all of these things together, what do we end up with? Or I guess this, yeah? And then
Yes.
what do we do with that?
So we actually use a soil block maker, and it's almost like a big cookie cutter for making soil blocks. So this here is our handy dandy soil block maker. And like I said before, it's kind of like a big cookie cutter or a mold that we use. And so in order to get these perfectly made squares out of soil, we use this machine. And the reason we are able to use it is because at the bottom it has all these individual squares, and then inside it even has little bitty divots. That's what gives us that little indentation in our soil block once we push it out. And so what we would do is we would take that mixture, that soil block mixture that we talked about, and it would be in a container, and we would push down on the soil mix and kind of move it around until the blocks are completely full of soil. They're nice and compacted, and then we're gonna lift it up and we're gonna put it above the tray, and with both hands we're actually going to push down and lift up, and the soil blocks will be left inside the tray. And so when we do that, we have to use this mixture. We have to make sure that it's really nice and wet, almost like a brownie batter mix, because when it's not wet enough, it won't hold a mold. And so the soil block maker is kind of like a big mold, and it makes squares for us. So we need this mixture to be wet enough that it's going to hold together so that it stays in the shape of the soil block maker. Now, if you're at home, you can use any kind of container. Here I have some plastic containers that I brought from home. Some ice cream containers are always good. I get plastic ones, so they work. This is my dog food container, so it's nice and shallow, which is nice for doing seedlings in. Or you can even, if you get a container with a lid, you can actually poke holes in the top of the lid, ideally a clear lid, and this actually becomes a mini greenhouse. So you would put your soil in, not all the way to the top, maybe halfway, and then you'd let your seedlings start in there. And this will give it heat and moisture, and it'll be a nice little ecosystem for those seedlings.
And it's this soil, the soil mix, that encompasses all of these things that we actually put in there. Is that right?
Yeah, so we're putting, and you can even do this with your soil mix. Now, if you're doing it in a container like this, you don't necessarily have to get it wet before you put it in there, because, you know, we're using a mold, so we need it to be wet. But if you're just using a plastic container at home, you can put the dry mix, you mix it in together, all the dry mixture, like almost like you're baking a cake, and then you can put it in here and then wet it. But you don't have to get it wet. You can get it wet before or after. Sometimes it's easier to do it afterwards, because when it's dry, you can just kind of scoop it up in the container, tap it so that you know that it's level, and then water the seeds in after you've planted them.
Yeah.
So here we have some prepared soil blocks that I made, and we are going to put some broccoli seeds in them. So I have this fancy little doohickey here. It's a seed planter from Johnny's, but you can just use your hands and your fingers to just kind of place the seeds in. The neat thing about our soil block maker is that it actually makes the little hole for the seed for you. Now, if you're doing this in a container or a tray at home, you can use the tip of a pencil or the tip of your finger, and you just want to make a little divot in the soil block, almost like a little belly button. And so that's where your seed is going to go in and find its home there. Now, these broccoli seeds, like we talked about before, they're really tiny. You can't even hardly see them in this little container here. And so that means that we're not going to be planting them very deep at all, because the rule of thumb is usually 2 to 3 times their width, and these aren't very wide, so they're not going to be planted very deep. Now, when you're planting them, you ideally want to put one per block, but if you get more than one, it's okay, because you can go back in and you can thin them out like we talked about with direct seeding, where you just take the smaller of the plants out and let the healthiest one survive. So once I've put my seeds into the little belly buttons, or the little divots in the soil, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to gently cover them back up, so that the seeds are covered and they are protected. And in a few days, some seeds take a few days, some take a little bit longer, but they should start to sprout up. And in a few weeks, we'll have our transplants right here, which are ready to go. So this is the beginning step. First, we're going to put them in the soil, and we're going to cover them so that they're protected and they can germinate. And we're going to water them really well also until they're big and strong. And then once they're nice and big, they'll be ready to go into the ground outside.
Awesome. And just to reiterate, we go through this process if we need to take extra special care of our plants before putting them out into the elements, right?
Correct. So the broccoli, because the seeds are so tiny and because the plants take so long to get big, we want to protect them here in the nursery or inside if you're doing this at home before we take them and put them into the ground.
Cool.
And always remember too, labeling. So once you put your seeds, whether it's in a tray or a container, whatever you've decided to put them in, just like we did outside when we direct seeded, we want to mark them. And I've put the name of the variety on here, and I will put that in the tray with the broccoli so that I know that it is broccoli. Because again, we had said before, when they first start growing their baby leaves, they kind of all look the same. So it could be broccoli, it could be cabbage, it could be cauliflower. I won't really know until I see the true leaves, but this keeps the guesswork out of it by putting the label on there.
And so when it's ready for transplant, we just do this, and that's it. We just take it out, I guess, without killing the plant.
Yeah, the roots of the plant will help hold that together.
Okay.
So that, I mean, you pretty much will do that. You'll kind of pop it out like that, but the roots will be holding all that soil together, so it won't fall apart as easily. And ideally, you've let the soil dry out a little bit too before you transplant it, so that it's not too moist and it doesn't just crumble. So like these that we're going to be demonstrating with, I actually stopped watering them, and now if you'll see, I can just break off a little cube of broccoli. This is our baby broccoli plant, and you can even kind of start to see these roots that are coming out of the side. And the reason we like these is because I can plant this right in the ground and its roots will just keep growing. It will never even have realized that I planted it in the ground or that it was in a tray before. And the neat thing about these is once these have gotten to be several inches, you can actually start to see that their true leaves are growing. And so the difference between their baby leaves per se, it's kind of like our baby teeth, right? We get our baby teeth, they fall out, and then our permanent teeth come in. Well, with plants, they all start with these little baby leaves, and they kind of all look the same. Whether it's broccoli or cabbage, these all kind of look the same. But once they start to get their true leaves, you'll notice that the true leaves are larger. They have more definition as far as the shape and the size. They also have the veins running along the main stem area. And so these are the leaves that tell you, I'm ready to be transplanted. I'm ready to be placed out into the world on my own to grow and become an adult.
Interesting. And so right before transplanting, you mentioned letting them dry out just a little bit. Is that also part of the hardening off process to kind of get them ready for a harsher environment so that they're not always in a manicured or babied environment?
This is true. Yeah, so that is a very good point. Hardening off, getting them ready for the change in their environment. So when we have these baby plants protected into the nursery, they have shade, they have cool air, they have unlimited water. So yes, when we're ready to go put them out into the field where they're going to get a lot of wind, they're going to get a lot of sun, there's going to be bugs, we want to take away their water so that one, the soil blocks are easier to work with, but two, like you mentioned, we're getting them ready to kind of fend on their own. Because once you transplant them, those roots are going to have to now grow and stretch to get to the water, because the water's not just pouring directly on them. Even though we have drip irrigation that waters our plants, they only drip in certain spots. So the roots of these plants, they have to be able to reach those spots and be able to take that water. So now we're out in the field and we're going to be transplanting baby broccoli plants. So like we discussed before, we can direct seed into the ground with our seeds, or we can start seeds for transplant later. And these broccoli plants right here were started for seed, and now they're ready to transplant because they have their beautiful true leaves and they're big enough to be able to survive the elements such as wind, sun, and bugs. So when you're ready to transplant, the first thing to do is decide where you want to put your plant. Now, if you're putting it into a bigger pot, then just make sure that that pot has plenty of potting soil and is free of weeds or large debris. If you're going to plant it outside in the ground, the same thing you want to think of is, are there any weeds growing, and is the soil too compact or too dry? If it is, you can add some compost, and this will help improve your soil. You can buy compost from the store or from a local supplier. Now for these, we're going to be using our drip irrigation to water. So when I plant these in the ground, I'm going to look for my emitters, which is where the water comes out of the drip line. And I want to make sure that I'm planting my baby plant very close to this, because this is what's going to water it until it grows up and we get broccoli from it. You can use your hands, or you can use a tool like this. This is a hand trowel, and I'm going to use it to dig my hole to put my transplant. Now when you're digging your hole, you want to make sure that it's going to be big enough to fit the entire soil block. So I have a big enough hole here now, and then I'm just going to gently tickle these roots and then put it into the hole and fill the hole back up. So now our baby broccoli is ready to go in his new home. And this is where he'll live until we get the food from it. And what I'll do is I will continue to plant my broccoli down the bed along the drip irrigation, but I need to make sure that I give enough space for each plant, because right now it's very small and it's not taking up much room. But once it's big and grown and it's ready to give us broccoli, it's going to take up a lot more space. So I have to keep that in mind whenever I plant. So when I go down to the next one, I'm going to skip one of my emitters right here, and I'm going to go to the next emitter, which is right here. And this is approximately about 2.5, maybe 3 feet that we're giving the space. So even though it doesn't look like, or even though it looks like there's a lot of room, once these grow up, they will take up all of this space and there won't be any room left. So I have my little soil block that we started our seeds in. I'm going to gently loosen these roots at the bottom, and then I'm going to pop it in the hole. Now when I cover it, I want to make sure that I'm covering up the entire soil block. I don't want to leave any exposed, because that soil could dry out and then this plant might not survive. So I'm going to keep going down this bed, which is 100 feet long, but you don't have to grow that big of a bed. And I'm going to plant my baby plants every other drip irrigation emitter. These are good guys. That is an earthworm, and seeing these guys in our soil is very good because they help keep the soil healthy with their poop. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed learning about direct seeding and starting seeds for transplant. I look forward to seeing you all try your own activities at home and what seeds you decide to direct seed or transplant. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you again soon.